The first man who gave me a hand, who tried to help me and not make a profit out of me, or have me as his mistress just for one night, was the librettist Raymond Asso. When he came into my life, I was in a tight corner. I was accused of having killed a man. Louis Leplee, the owner of Gerny's, the famous nightclub in the Rue Pierre Charon, had just been found dead. Immediately, I was the prime suspect. Why? My past, no doubt. Unfortunately for me, I was not unknown to the police. By the time I was 20, I'd already spent 2 or 3 years in Pigalle. I'd been seen with pimps, thieves, and petty criminals. I'd often been taken away in the police van. And at the Quai des Orfèvres, they still remembered Albert's attempt to shoot me. But in the meantime, I'd suddenly become famous. I'd found fame only through my voice and that man, Louis Leplee, who had discovered me when I was singing in the streets. He'd engaged me for his nightclub where all the top people of Paris came. When I sang, those good-timers, those blasé people fell silent. I was an overnight success. Somewhere in the crowd which squeezed into this fashionable club every night was Maurice Chevalier. Suddenly he'd stood up and shouted, "Bravo! The girl's got everything it takes." My career was launched. At first I saw an end to the poverty, the start of a new life, a life in which I could sing as much as I wanted and dedicate myself to this passion for singing. And all of a sudden, Leplee was murdered in mysterious circumstances while he was in a Turkish bath. The police did not spare me. No, I can't say they did. They clamped down on me. I was arrested, charged, and interrogated for hours. When at last they released me, for lack of evidence, I was a wreck, and my career was in ruins. Every door closed in my face. People looked through me. I received mysterious, threatening phone calls. The tough guys in the underworld became hopeful again. They were trying to get me back under their control. It was then that I remembered Raymond Asso, that tall, thin, wiry man who had once told me, "I love you." I'd burst out laughing. He was too gentle, too kind. I was used to the tough guys, and I hadn't understood his romantic talk. "Edith," he'd added, "take my phone number. One day you'll need me. When that time comes, call me. I'll be there." As he left, I laughed out loud again. Who does he think he is? Need him? That'll be the day. I wasn't laughing anymore. I was cornered. I'd plumbed the depths of human meanness. I dialed Raymond's number without much hope. He would let me down, like the others. Then he came on the line. "Raymond," I admitted, "you were right. I need you. I feel lost. I'm frightened. I'm going to do something stupid." There was a moment's silence, and then I heard Raymond's voice. He was very calm. "Take a taxi," he ordered. "I'm waiting for you. Everything will be all right." It was really as simple as that. I took a taxi. I arrived at Raymond's place with nothing, but not even a suitcase, and he changed my life. Before that, I had never opened a book. I thought reading was for middle-class people. I would just read serial stories with titles like "Seduced at 20." I read them for a laugh. I reveled in silliness like some dirty little creature in the mud. I enjoyed it. And I reveled in ugliness, too. The more silly my songs, the more ugly I felt, and the more pleased I was. I felt a kind of evil pleasure in destruction. in destroying myself and in spoiling everything that was beautiful. It was my way of living through despair. Raymond transformed me. He taught me how to become a human being. It took him 3 years to cure me. 3 years of patient affection to teach me that there was another world beyond that of prostitutes and pimps. 3 years to cure me of Pigalle, of my chaotic childhood and all its attendant vice and misery. 3 years to teach me to believe in love, happiness, and good fortune. To become a woman and a star, not just a phenomenon with a voice that people listen to just as they might look at some rare animal on show at a fair. And yet I deceived that wonderful man at the very moment when it was most painful for him. It's not easy to confess a bad deed, but it's even more painful to remember how you inflicted pain, how you couldn't stop yourself from doing it, driven by the demon that lies dormant in every one of us, a demon which awoke only too often in me. When I left Raymond in 1939, I knew that I was made to sing about love. I'd had a triumph at the Alhambra when I gave my first recital. I sang songs which Raymond had written for me. Mon légionnaire, le fainéant de la Légion, le voyage du pauvre nègre, je n'en connais pas la fin. Thanks to him, I'd really been able to become a star and not remain a mere curiosity. Raymond Asso had in fact been called up at the time when I fell in love with Paul Maurice. Raymond, I've already asked you to forgive me. You know it. Our friends know it. But today I want to ask you to forgive me once more. You were so good, so kind. And I know that you understood that if I went from one man to another, it wasn't because I was a bitch, but because I was searching for a love so great that my whole life would have been transformed by it. It has to be said that when it came to seducing me, Paul didn't beat about the bush. I was alone in Paris during the war, and I was singing at the nightclub in the Rue Arsène Houssaye. Before I came on, about midnight, I always went to have a drink at a bar called La Caravelle. Every evening there was a man there leaning casually against the bar. He was calm, elegant, nonchalant. He fascinated me. It was Paul Maurice. All I knew about him was that as a singer he hadn't much of a voice. He was appearing at L'Amiral, the rival nightclub to mine. Gradually we came to know each other. Paul amazed me. His good manners made me see him as the typical gentleman, and at that time, what wouldn't I have done to make the conquest of a gentleman? You have to understand that before Paul, no one had ever helped me into my coat. No one had ever opened a door for me, standing back to let me go through first. But he did it all. He did that better than anyone else. One evening, he made a suggestion to me. After the show, come and drink a glass of champagne at my place. I've invited a whole lot of friends. I accepted. I was thrilled. And about 2 a.m, we accompanied his friends back to their apartment. After that, we were alone. Then, with his usual air of detachment, he made one other suggestion. I think there's still a little champagne at home. Come and help me finish it. When we had finished the champagne, day was breaking. Paul spoke to me coldly. It's late. Why don't you stay on here? In any case, that's how it will end. Then he looked me in the eye. Nothing irritates me more, he said finally, than women who want to wait 3 days, a month, or more before giving in. Why make so much fuss, since in any case we like each other? I was disarmed, convinced, carried away. I said yes. Our affair lasted 2 years. What an adventure that was! Oh, chaotic, passionate, and now that I think about it again, marvelous, all the same. When we separated, Paul had finally lost the thing that irritated me most about him, his damnable sang-froid. At first I often lost my temper. He never lost his. When we quarreled, it was I who looked wild and ridiculous. He didn't react. In the end, I found that he was defying me. I would go up to him quietly on tiptoe without his noticing, and I'd suddenly scream loudly right in his ear. But he didn't even jump. Then I'd smash everything up. I'd throw glasses at the wall just above his head. I threw everything I could get my hands on. I screamed, I stamped, I wept, I insulted him. Paul lay quietly on the bed, closed his eyes, and put a newspaper over his face. He said only one thing. "Don't smash the radio, please." Then one day, just to drive him into a rage, I broke his famous radio. As I held it in my hands, Paul half opened one eye. Then I threw the radio on the floor and stamped on it. This time, Paul, the gentleman, got up without a word. He stood close to me. "That wasn't a nice thing to do," he said. Then he slapped my face and lay down on the bed again. I'd failed. His sang-froid drove me crazy. So one evening after a fight, I told him, "It's all over between us. I'm leaving." I went to have dinner with Tino Rossi at Fouquet's. But during that dinner, I could talk only about Paul. I loved him. He drove me mad. I missed him. Then Tino secretly telephoned Paul. "We're going to the Dinarzade. Come and join her. You're the only man she's thinking about." But it would have been too easy. I wasn't to be had like that. When Paul arrived, my anger suddenly broke out again. In front of everyone, I threatened to smash a bottle of champagne over his head. He left again, without a word. When I came out, he was waiting for me in the street beside a fiacre. There was a terrible battle. I didn't want to go with him, and he tried with all his strength to make me get into that fiacre. In the end, he managed to grab hold of me and force me down on the seat. As the fiacre went along at a trotting pace, I yelled at the top of my voice, "Help! Police! I'm being kidnapped!" When we arrived home, Paul laid me down on the pavement, sat on top of me, and holding on to my hand, said to the coachman, "Take my wallet out of my pocket and pay yourself." When the fiacre had gone, Paul dragged me up the stairs. I yelled with anger. I struggled. I kicked him. In the end, he succeeded in getting me into the apartment. As soon as he let me go, I rushed to the door and tried to get away again, but something stopped me. The hard-bitten Paul, who was so infuriatingly passive, collapsed and sat on the edge of a chair. "I can't take any more, Didou," he murmured. "Stop, I beg you. Stay with me." I was shattered. I stayed. But our union wasn't any calmer. I decided to make him jealous, thinking I'd keep him closer to me. What a plague I was! I made dates with men in cafes, and I could sense that Paul was following me down the street. He took amazing precautions to stop me from recognizing him. He would slip behind street lamps, hide behind cars or in courtyard entrances. He would spy on me. He would wait for me on the pavement for hours. One day, in a fury, he burst into the cafe where I was sitting with another man and said, "Come back home at once." I obeyed him immediately. In the street, I tripped along beside him. "Paul," I told him, "it was all a game. I was stupid. I wanted to make you jealous." But Paul didn't reply and dragged me along by my arm. As soon as I was home, he began to smash everything that I'd spared so far. Then he slapped me so hard that I had a black eye, which hurt so much I couldn't eat anything for 3 days. In the end, it was our profession that separated us, and not our quarrels or fights. Paul was away on tour all the time, and so was I. One day, we didn't meet anymore. And then quietly, without any tears or shouting, Paul became a friend to me. The most delightful of friends. I was 25. I'd lived a hectic life, and yet I still didn't know what love was really like. For me, it had been fighting, telling big lies, and blows. That was no doubt why, after Paul, my amorous adventures became pathetic. There was a married composer. He was a handsome man, tall and elegant. He led me up the garden path for months. He kept on saying to me, "Give me a month to divorce my wife. After that, I'll never leave you again." The truth was that he hadn't the courage to get a divorce. "If," I said to him, "I see that you're stringing me along, I'll be unfaithful to you." He was stringing me along. I kept my word. I was unfaithful to him. The next day I told him, but he was so conceited that he didn't want to believe me. So I picked up the telephone and called my new lover. The composer took the other receiver. When he put it down, he was as white as a sheet and left. With this sort of behavior, it was obvious what would happen in the end, and it did happen. Men took me for an easy lay. I became a legend for my entourage, fair game for theater people passing through. Men took me for granted, and yet, deep within me, I felt pure and desperate, and a long way from this degrading image. I realized how far I had fallen one day in New York when I was dining with friends in my suite at the Waldorf Astoria. I had invited John Garfield, the American film star. After the meal, I accompanied my other guests to the door, but when I came back to the drawing room, John had disappeared. I looked for him everywhere, and finally I found him, very sure of himself, lying on my bed, smoking a cigarette and completely naked. I threw his clothes in his face and chucked him out. Then I flung myself on my bed in tears and swore I'd turn over a new leaf. All this lying, all this fighting, these sordid deceptions, it all came to a bad end. Thanks to this idiotic life, I passed close to a great love and failed to see it because I didn't believe in it. I was in Greece in 1946. In Athens, where I was singing. Every night when I left the stage, I was brought a bouquet of flowers, always the same ones. I wondered who was sending them to me. One night he came, tall, with dark curly hair, proud and romantic. He was called Takis Menelas. He was a stage artist. He took me to the foot of the Acropolis and began to talk to me. The moonlight, the sound of singing that rose from the town, and the voice of Takis beside me, a warm, vibrant voice. I felt like a young girl hearing a declaration of love for the first time. For a week I lived through a great love. Takis begged me to stay. "Stay," he said. "If you go, I know that I'll never see you again. Stay. For you, I'll get a divorce. We'll be married. Stay, sacrifice your fame. Stay with me in this wonderful country." But I didn't believe him. I'd thrown away love so often myself that I didn't believe in anything anymore, except perhaps in pleasure. I saw Takis again 4 years later. He was staying briefly in Paris. He was on his way back from New York, where he had turned down a fabulous contract. He had turned down fame and riches because he was homesick for his own country. That day we saw each other for barely a few minutes. His lips trembled as he spoke to me. I know that you don't love me anymore, but I haven't forgotten you. For you, in memory of you, I've gone through a divorce. That day I realized that I'd passed happiness by, and it was my fault. All I'd needed was a little more confidence. I had news of Takis Menelas during one of my recent illnesses. He sent me back a good luck medallion which I had given him, with these simple words, "You need it more than I do." And now the time has come to speak to you about the man who truly brought light into my life, the man who surely would have transformed it forever if death had not shattered our marvelous relationship. No doubt you understand that I'm referring to the great boxing champion, Marcel Cerdan.